Greetings. Here we are at week 4 already. By this point in the course, you should each now have a risk identification table for the class project. We're going to be using the instructor provided version of that table so that we're all kind of on the same page going forward as we look at what our assignment is for this week, which is going to be putting together a qualitative risk assessment using those risks that we've identified. Before we do that, I guess I'd like to speak to you just briefly about defining risk and how you go about doing that. I noticed that a number of you have been a little bit challenged with defining the risk to the program as opposed to risk factors or risk areas that might have an effect on the program. What we want to do is take a look at what those risk factors are and what those risk areas are and aggregate those together to put together a very short, brief, and succinct description of what the actual risk event is that could impact the program. If you take a look at the example I provided in the instructor version, I think you'll maybe get a good understanding of what that looks like when we put together a risk description that talks about risk events instead of risk factors. Okay, so moving along. This week, the assignment is going to be a qualitative risk assessment. Qualitative risk assessment is often done at the early portions of a project because it doesn't require quite as much information to be available to do kind of in-depth assessments. At the beginning of a project, many times we don't have that detailed data available. And if we do have it available, it doesn't always make sense to do a deep dive on every area if we assess the risk to be of low probability or to be of low impact if it should occur. So that's what the qualitative risk assessment does for us. It gives us sort of a first cut through at looking at our risk and getting an idea of what the risk probability is and what the impact of the risk might be if in fact it does occur. We're going to be using the heat chart approach, which was described in your textbook. I've provided you with a template that will help you to put together that assessment. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Again, you're going to have to make some assumptions perhaps because there's not a lot of information available in the scenario in a detailed form, but that's okay. Like I said, in many cases you will find that to be the situation in the real world as well. You may wonder about quantitative risk assessments and why we're not doing that. Quantitative risk assessments are much more in-depth and much more detailed, often require more automation in terms of tools for doing the assessment. And as I mentioned before, often doing a detailed assessment isn't necessary in specific areas unless we figure that they're going to be high probability or high impact. The qualitative risk assessment will actually give you a way of mapping where you should be doing quantitative risk assessments to get a much better handle or much better feel of what the overall risk might be in those specific areas. So having said all this, I wish you good luck as you go forward doing your qualitative risk assessment, and I look forward to seeing the results of your efforts. Thank you very much.